All right. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to talk about my paper topic, which is the inevitability of Americanized Buddhism, or sort of the modernization of the Buddhist practice once it took off in America. So the first question to answer within this subject is defining what Americanized Buddhism actually is. And it's sort of, in essence, is the adaptation of Buddhism that accentuates spirituality and mindfulness and meditation. And a lot of traditional Buddhist practices kind of get put in the back seat. And that's not to say that there are no American Buddhists who, have like a rigid prayer temple schedule, or that don't study like ancient Buddhist scripture and history. But it's sort of the idea that Buddhism in America is backed by the core principles of spirituality and meditation over anything else. And so the central debate that was created on the after this subject is basically, is this modernization of Buddhism offensive to traditional Buddhists, as it omits a number of core practices and values that are in some ways imperative to traditional Buddhism. And I think, looking at sort of the argument that meditation and spirituality being the focus of Buddhism is not representative of true Buddhism. The main kind of points behind that are this idea of self, which we talked a lot about in class, with the idea of no self and the idea of relieving oneself of the stress of thinking about oneself. And I think in a lot of the examples we looked at, and like specifically like the Jatakas and stuff like that, the idea of no self is sort of the ideal. You're looking to relieve yourself of any notion of self. And I think a lot of people argue that meditation and mindfulness and stuff like that in this modern Buddhism in America are the opposite. And they are all forms of self-fulfillment, and they're very individualistic. And I think a lot of people find that it's sort of the antithesis of what traditional Buddhists view in terms of self. And the other big point is consumerism, which is sort of off the point of self, which is a lot of people feel that Buddhism was sort of exploited once meditation and spirituality kind of took over. And I think Goldberg talks a lot about this, and she mentions in one of her texts people who would sell things like called Dharma items, which kind of were like meditation cushions or books titled Ancient Wisdom of Dream Yoga or Secrets of Immortality. And it's really just stuff like that, where people kind of took these mystical sounding words and ideas to like profit off of and exploit the new dependencies people had on spirituality and meditation. And moving along, though, to the sort of the argument that this Americanization and this presence of spirituality was sort of inevitable and something we need to look at as a positive in America. We have a number of sort of points here. The first being that when America sort of took in, or Americans sort of took in Buddhism, it was seen as exotic and different. And Goldberg talks a lot about how, like, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the younger generation was losing their grip and their interest on organized religion, and they didn't really want this like rigid, structured religion in their lives. And so Buddhism offered sort of an alternative that was new and exciting. And I think that, coupled with sort of the logistical benefits that certain aspects of Buddhism provided, is what pointed to the inevitability of it taking off. And the logistical side of things are that Buddhism sort of offered an alternative to people who couldn't financially, stick to a rigid schedule of like sort of commuting to a church or a temple and then taking that time out of their work day or something. And with Buddhism, they had this alternative to sort of take 10 or 15 minutes to meditate at home, and it still gave them that sense of like an attachment to a core set of ideals and beliefs, but they had time to do it and they had like a choice. And moving on, sort of in the same vein, is the faster pace of life, like what I was just talking about in America. A lot of Americans, especially in this modern age, they have big families, small homes, had big work weeks, and they just, and the idea that there was a religion that from which they could take like just an aspect of like, sorry, like there was an aspect of religion that was an option to them now, where they could just take on their own, with their own agency, like a certain amount of time out of the day, and just focus on like stress relief, and that was it. And it was perfect for them. And sort of going off this point of stress relief, in Buddhism, that a lot of people found was what coincided with the rise of Buddhism in America was the rise of mental health, and and how a lot of people saw meditation as a form of therapy, and and it kind of allowed people to like get these new, it's like what Garces fully describes as a sort of get high without the risk of drugs. It allowed people to like take a step back, take time out of the day to relax and de-stress. And I think that was another reason that Buddhism really caught on. And so just to wrap up with our conclusions and a lot of things that I took from this debate is that Buddhism, when it really gained the equal traction, had the side that saw like meditation and spirituality as not representative of Buddhism. If that side sort of had more traction or more backing, then Buddhism as a whole would not really have had the traction it has now in America, because it's simply, at the end of the day, spirituality and meditation being a focal point of Buddhism just made the religion and the practice easier for people in America. And going off that, people in America are going to continue to have hectic and fast-paced lives. And so this idea that they can still have a belief system, but also have like agency over when they meditate and when they practice, is going to just become more and more important, more and more influential. So at any point, whether it was 20 years ago or 20 years on the road, Buddhism in this light, this modern Buddhism, would have caught on. And lastly, just to wrap up, spirituality and meditation still are core Buddhist values. So at no point are people who take these things as what Buddhism is to them, they're not ever looking at it in like an offensive way. It's all positivity on that end. So I think I'm over time, and that's going to be it for me. Thank you for listening.